From our offices in Boston, Massachusetts, and New Orleans, Louisiana, this is Design of Play, with your host, Chris Canfield. I'm watching old episodes of Frasier to figure out what the heck these buttons do. Also, your man in the booth, Edo Davis. Today's episode, The Failure of Disney Quest.
Welcome to the Design of Play with Chris Canfield. I'm that second one. Disney is an unstoppable entertainment machine. They own ESPN, ABC, Marvel, Pixar, Star Wars, The Muppets, Touchstone. They own 35 radio stations, 15 theme parks, 4 cruise liners, a tech accelerator, a branded suburb of Florida, and a private island. They made $49.7 billion worldwide revenue last year. That's higher than the GDP of more than half of the countries in the world. Disney is a bigger country than the majority of countries. So when they announced the closing of Disney Quest theme park, there were inevitably two questions. One, how could a Disney theme park fail? And two, what's Disney Quest? Now, Disney closing theme parks happens more often than you think, especially since you haven't been thinking about it. Disney shut down Discovery Island and River Country in 1999 and 2001. However, these had been successful enough to open significantly larger related Disney parks. Not failed, just grown out of. Euro Disney did get off to a legendarily rocky start and seemed like it might fail. It has since been rebranded 4 times, finally setting on Disneyland Paris. And through a lot of effort, it has become the most visited theme park in all of Europe and the second most visited Disney park. Disney Quest, on the other hand, just failed. To answer the question of what is Disney Quest, then CEO Michael Eisner, here voiced by an actor, said in corporatese,
Disney Quest combines the excitement of the Disney brand with innovation, design, technology, and storytelling to create a vibrant venue for interactive entertainment that provides a dynamic new kind of Disney experience for the entire family.
And for an English translation of whatever the heck that was, let's turn it over to their ads.
Okay, if you like gaming, get ready for some interactive action like you've never seen at Disney Quest Indoor Interactive Theme Park. Disney Quest is 5 floors of gaming.
Notice they never actually use the word arcade.
Disney Quest is the place for fun and games for the whole family. And it's only here at Downtown Disney, part of your utopia, a magical place that revolves around you and your family.
Disney Quest launched in 1998, firmly in what Disneyland heads consider the declining Eisner era, so named for the famous corner-cutting CEO Michael Eisner. Eisner and his partners Wells and Katzenberg were given the reins of Disney in 1984 in a boardroom coup, and for 10 years Disney experienced a huge golden era. However, Eisner was a ruthless and manic corporate type. Wells tempered this a bit and Katzenberg delivered stunning family entertainment, but Wells died in a helicopter crash in 1994 and Katzenberg left. Without his partners, Eisenberg's cost-cutting, reliance on subpar direct-to-home video sequels, and neglect of many other theme parks crashed Disney's fortune. By 2005, Eisner has been outed by many of the same people that put him into power. The quintessential example of Eisner park cost-cutting is the rocket rods in Disneyland. If you know any Disney heads, and by the way, yes, Disneyland heads are a real thing, the rocket rods opened in 1998 as the keystone to a revamp of Tomorrowland. Tomorrowland, by this point, was a real anachronism, a 1950s view of what the future looked like that was crumbling and decaying. Rocket rods were supposed to have General Motors as a sponsor, but GM pulled out due to the 2-year delay in launching the GM test track at Walt Disney World, Florida. So, with only $25 million out of a projected $50 million budget, the rocket rods were redesigned. And by redesigned, I mean gutted. They were always intended to reuse sections of the abandoned and much slower People Mover track, but they were supposed to add high-speed banking corners. When Disney's management refused to make up for the missing budget, Disney's Imagineers abandoned the idea of banking corners and instead had to use the track pretty much exactly as is. This meant that the rocket rods had to shoot up to high speeds on straightaways and then screech to a near halt to take any corners. This was a terrible, jolting experience for the riders, and actually more importantly for the mechanics. For the high levels of acceleration and braking required, they had to use aircraft carrier surfacing, which tore up 70,000-mile tires in 2 weeks. The old cement in the track was not created for such acceleration and deceleration and began cracking. The guide wheels wore out quickly, the engines rattled themselves out of existence, the computer software needed revamping, the tire pressure system never worked, the brakes were overworked. It was one of the most expensive rides to run at Disneyland, in no small part because it broke down on average once per day on the few days it was actually open. It closed after 2 short years in operation, invalidating the entire investment, and that was all because cost-cutting removed the banking from the tracks. In that context of cost awareness, Disney Quest was conceived as the low-cost theme park for every possible city. Here's the numbers that Eisner was staring down. Medium wage in the US is $26,695, or approximately 1.1 Ford Mustangs. A midline roller coaster at a normal theme park costs about $10 million, or 424 Ford Mustangs. But Disney coasters, such as Disneyland Paris's Space Mountain, frequently go high as $100 million. Euro Disney cost $2.37 billion to create. That's billion with a B. That's the cost of 100,000 Ford Mustangs. Similarly, when the existing but failing California Adventure, another suffering Eisner project, underfunded at only $600 million, when that was revamped in 2008, the cost was $1.1 billion. Now, by comparison, a traditional video game arcade can cost between $125,000 and $1 million. Somewhat more expensive regional entertainment centers with arcades, bumper cars, mini-golf, and other attractions were popping up around the country and serving local entertainment needs without the needs for a mouse. Disney's expensive. Traveling to a Disney theme park was something a family had to save up all year for, but a family could just drive to a regional Golfland arcade for a birthday party or two on a whim. Disney figured that was a market they weren't tapping into. If Disney could create an $80 million regional fun center with some of that Disney magic, they could take a big bite out of that market without taking on more risk than another Julia Roberts film, and they could replicate this across the country. In fact, not doing it was perceived as a risk. The legendary Chuck E. Cheese had weathered their first boom and collapse, but it was beginning to expand out across America again. Parents who had been flying children to Disneyland for their birthday could now be serenaded by a different animatronic rat. Similarly, Dave & Buster's, which aimed for an adult version of the Chuck E. Cheese audience when it opened in 1982, was just starting their great period of expansion of video games and beer. But the thing that really drove Disney to embrace this idea was GameWorks, and their connection to one Jeffrey Katzenberg. If you remember, Katzenberg came on with Eisner. Katzenberg oversaw Disney's transition from dead last to #1 in films, with such titles as Down and Out in Beverly Hills, Three Men and a Baby, and Good Morning Vietnam. Eisner was then put turnaround artist Katzenberg at the head of the failed Disney Animation, which, when he joined, hadn't had a truly successful film since The Jungle Book in 1967. First, Katzenberg created the love letter to animation with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, putting the golden age of animation, and therefore Disney, firmly back in the public mind. Then he produced legendary films The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. He sealed the deal that linked Pixar and Disney. He was clearly Michael Eisner's number 3 man behind Frank Wells. But he was ambitious. And when Frank Wells died in a plane crash in 1994, Eisner refused to promote Katzenberg to president of Disney. Katzenberg and Eisner had a very public fight. Katzenberg quit, there was a huge lawsuit, Katzenberg made $250 million in a settlement, and an enemy forever. He was still considered a Hollywood kingmaker, however, and he joined with legendary director Steven Spielberg and legendary music mogul David Geffen. It was a legendary event. DreamWorks SKG was expected to topple Disney. Heck, if you listen to the hype at the time, DreamWorks SKG was expected to topple the world. And without Katzenberg at the helm, Disney's animation department was in a very public death spiral with bombs like Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Hercules. The second golden age of Disney animation clearly left with Katzenberg, and everyone expected that gold to come with him to DreamWorks SKG. So when Disney killer DreamWorks SKG, in partner with Disney competitor Universal and sometimes Disney partner Sega, announced they were launching a family fun food and game center, Eisner sat up and took notice. Each location cost $10 million to build, and 150 of these GameWorks were planned. $1.5 billion were riding on it. GameWorks clearly had to be successful. Spielberg was in it. Katzenberg was in it. Michael Eisner was going to be damned if Disney would lose the regional family fun wars to those two turncoats. In the light of GameWorks' plan for 150 locations, Disney Quest's planned 20 centers seemed downright conservative, tiny even. But they were going to invest 10 times as much money into each arcade. Disney never called them arcades, though, but envisioned them as a custom Disney-created virtual reality centers.
For more about the death and rebirth of virtual reality, check out episode 3 of the podcast.
These centers would bring in the Disney magic directly to the parents of the world for a 3-hour themed vacation at a reasonable price. These would all be set in high-density urban areas conveniently closer to the audience than Disney World. And so, in 1998, the first Disney Quest opened in Disney World. The irony of opening a mini theme park as an alternative to flying to Disney World in Disney World was not actually lost on Disney. They mainly wanted to work out the bugs on their home turf. To really test the concept in the real world, Disney opened Disney Quest Chicago 1 year later in 1999, and planned for another one immediately in Philadelphia. Chicago was growing in the dot-com boom, leading to families with available spending money. Disney Quest was smack in the middle of downtown Chicago, between a Marriott's and a Bloomingdale. It was perfectly positioned to get busy downtown foot traffic. It advertised 5 floors of family fun, which was a mouthful and a mansion for the time.
As a major national hub and international destination, Chicago is an ideal site for Disney Quest's first non-theme park location,
said Art Levitt, president of Disney Regional Entertainment, created to manage Disney Quest, here voiced by an actor.
It is a city that represents the best, from world-class restaurants, entertainment, architecture, and culture to its world champion sports teams, and I am confident that Disney Quest will be a perfect fit.
And within 2 years, Disney Quest Chicago had failed. Disney Quest Philadelphia was canceled, Disney Regional Entertainment was no more, and the Disney Quest concept was dead. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Opening day. In 1999, the first dot-com boom was still booming. The human population had just surpassed 6 billion people. Lance Armstrong won his first, soon-to-be-redacted, Tour de France. Columbine shooting terrified American parenthood, and Disney Quest Chicago opened for the first time on Wednesday, June 16th, 1999. It was the mid-60s, colder than expected for a sunny Chicago day, but the people that had lined up for the opening didn't seem to care. The long lines and crowds of confused people seemed understandable for the launch of any normal, successful theme park. Disney Quest would prove to be neither of those.
Check out Cyberspace Mountain, where you design, then ride your very own roller coaster.
Yep, it was a roller coaster builder like ones you could get on your PC even at the time.
Then climb aboard Buzz Lightyear's Astro Blasters, futuristic bumper cars that'll have you bumping and blasting your way through the galaxy.
Bumper cars with guns. Fun when they worked, but not really $36 fun.
Even man your own virtual pirate ship and battle sea monsters and enemy vessels as you hunt for treasure.
Okay, that one I can't say anything bad about, because that game was amazing. But other games in Disney Quest included a virtual reality jungle cruise with paddles and rapids, like the Namco arcade game Rapid River, Aladdin's Magic Carpet Ride, where you fly on a magic carpet to meet the genie. Similar to the PC game Magic Carpet, there was a living easel where people could paint virtually in the real world, just like painting, and many others, all with the usual Disney touch of flair, but even at that time, all of which had been eclipsed by similar but broadly available video games. And they got dated fast. Captain EO, a 1986 3D film starring Michael Jackson as an attraction in Disneyland, looks as good today as it did in 1986, with the exception of the dated hairdos. But unlike film, computer games graphics double in quality every year, and rebuilding each attraction to chase that quality is cost prohibitive. So with only 2 locations, the cost of rebuilding each attraction had to be split between 2 locations. If a ride had a $6 million development budget, each location would need to earn $3 million more to offset that cost. At the going rate of $24 per person when Disney Quest Chicago closed, each ride refresh would need to be offset by 125,000 additional visitors. If they had succeeded in opening 20 locations, a $6 million dev budget could be spread across 20 locations, with each location only responsible for about $300,000. That would be just 12,000 additional visitors. Without that quantity of locations, updating games became prohibitively expensive. Because of this, the games languished in old technology and older visuals. Disney went to great lengths to avoid calling Disney Quest an arcade, but most people lumped them together. Disney Quest even had a classic gaming floor with the 1980s arcade games. The outdated arcade quickly became the metaphor for the entire endeavor. While the plan was to rotate out 25% of the attractions every year, no known rotation has ever occurred, with almost all of Disney Quest Florida remaining the same as the day it opened. But there were other fundamental problems with Disney Quest besides the attractions. Disney Quest really needed a Walmart-sized parking lot to attract interest from across the region, but instead it was situated dead in the middle of the Chicago Loop. On-street parking there, when you can find it, currently costs 26 quarters an hour. 26 quarters an hour. And while Disney was relying on ambient foot traffic, shockingly, not many small children work in downtown Chicago. At least, not many the city will admit to. Their bread and butter really were the baby boomers, and the regional entertainment center was set up in exactly the last region they'd want to park their minivans. Cost was also a huge issue, with several large missteps. Disney Quest started with a stored value card-based system sponsored by American Express. This allowed players a certain number of plays on certain types of machine, with the option to recharge for more. This is like a lot of arcades now, but unlike arcades now, they actually were still charging $36 to get in. And they put a little value on the card, but it was never quite clear how much or where or what it was. You know what? Let's just summarize as it was a mess. They soon switched to a flat rate model. And the cost of entry itself was higher than many parents wanted to pay. It's $24 for a family of four to do a round of miniature golf. Including parking in downtown Chicago, the same family of four would have to pay $164 to visit Disney Quest. Now, bean counters would point out that's still much cheaper than flying to Disneyland or Disney World. It's also significantly higher than going to Golfland. By the end of 2001, Disney Quest Chicago had dropped the price to $24, which meant they were making significantly less money per person to provide their quote-unquote family fun. And while we're on the subject, virtual reality may not be the best way to create all-inclusive family fun. Kids were entertained, but parents had very little to do. Their kids were off having adventures, but parents just saw their kids wiggling around wearing silly visors or disappearing into VR caves. For a family fun center, there wasn't actually much family fun to be had. Parents felt disconnected at the point where togetherness is exactly the point they were trying to be selling. The VR element also limits throughput. A 5-minute experience that supports 2 riders at once has a maximum throughput of 288 riders a day. By comparison, a 5-minute roller coaster can support about 24 riders per train, with 2 or 3 trains running simultaneously on one track. That's 10,386 riders a day. And remember, Disney Quest had switched from a pay-per-ride model to a flat-rate all-day model. When people paid a flat rate for all-day fun, they tended to stay around all day, and more rides than before were needed. Of course, exactly when more rides were needed, mechanical problems with VR plagued the center, as did projection, lighting issues, etc. On a random sample weekend in May 2015, Buzz Lightyear was down, most of Cyberspace Mountain was down, and about 50% of the other attractions were offline. It was clear from early on that Disney Quest ride lines were a major problem, sometimes extending up to 3 hours. Remember, an entire visit was supposed to be 3 hours. To this day, they keep pushing the 3-hour number as, please show up and then leave. It never happened. People just show up and spend all day. One review summarized Disney Quest as slow, crowded, disorganized. Disney Quest has the dubious distinction of having both more visitors than it could support and not enough visitors to stay in business.
Disney Quest is
The closure of Disney Quest was cited in Chicago papers in many different ways. Lack of parking, or how technology couldn't replace family fun. The Chicago Tribune summarized the fall as long lines and high prices. When Disney Quest Chicago was closed, control of the original Disney Quest in Florida was handed from the crumbling Disney Regional Entertainment to Disney World proper. All in-progress Disney Quest locations were dropped, like the one intended as a centerpiece for the revitalization of downtown Philadelphia. Sorry guys, this left the city of brotherly love on the hook for $44 million in bonds, which they'll be paying off until 2029. Ouch. And there ceased to be any improvements made to the existing Disney Quest in Florida. Instead, it has been allowed to drift along without improvements so long as it could pay worker salaries, with Disney choosing to expand in other areas of the park. While official numbers are hard to come by, unofficial daily attendance has dropped to as low as maybe 20. And now it's being moved to make way for the far more exciting sounding NBA experience.
At Disney, everything is not just the gold standard, it's the platinum standard. We're not willing to do something if it's not the best.
Those are the words of Disney spokeswoman Leslie Farrago, here voiced by an actor.
The technology there was absolutely cutting edge, with a stream of new attractions, and that doesn't come inexpensively. That's not to say someone who isn't Disney couldn't do it a different way. Disney is always looking for opportunities for growth, and we feel proud that we did a very good job at Disney Quest, and people loved it, but it was a test.
And while Disney Quest was a failed test, their competitors didn't do much better either. Let's check the scores. Their main competitors, Dave & Buster's, managed to refocus on food and beer, which accounts for more than 50% of their earnings. They've shrunk a bit from their heyday, with several locations removing all of their arcade games. Chuck E. Cheese focused on pizza, which I guess counts as food, and animatronic entertainment. The arcades have dwindled, replaced by skee-ball and ticket machines. Despite their huge public collapse in the late 80s, Chuck E. Cheese now has 577 locations across North America, South America, and the Middle East. As a side note, the Toledo, Ohio location of Chuck E. Cheese is internet famous for being more dangerous than the local biker bar due to combining alcohol, screaming children, and agitated parents, and presumably Ohio's very polite local bikers. Even Disney Quest regional partners and Regional Disney, ESPN Zone, and Club Disney all failed. But what about GameWorks, the DreamWorks SKG Sega Universal project that spurred Eisner into this whole misadventure in the first place? Their restaurant fun centers were as poorly attended as Disney Quest. Of the initial planned 150 restaurants, only 18 were ever made, and that seemingly was out of Sega's dogged and quixotic determination to save their larger business selling arcade cabinets. DreamWorks SKG left in 2001, with Universal forced out from bankruptcy in 2004. Did I mention bankruptcy? GameWorks filed for bankruptcy twice, and avoided bankruptcy a third time by being sold to the current owners. The current owners, by the way, have nothing to do with Sega, DreamWorks, or Universal. Of course, that doesn't mean regional entertainment is dead. If I name drop Golfland one more time, the ghost of arcades past will appear in the room and clobber me with a sock full of tokens. And there was another shining light that came out of all of this. Disney Quest Center in Chicago emboldened Virtual World Entertainment, who created the BattleTech Virtual Reality Center on Chicago's lovely North Pier in 2000. This was after Disney Quest opened, but before it died. BattleTech Center was a much more modest operation, focused on one specific game and with up to a maximum of 16 simultaneous players. BattleTech's anime robots beating each other up premise captured the public attention at exactly the right time. The flight simulator level of controls and physics simulation ensured that there was plenty of depth for repeat business, and unlike Disney Quest, it was successful enough to open 24 centers around the world, before declining by 2000 when it sold itself to Microsoft. BattleTech Chicago eventually closed too, with the cabinets being sold off to, you guessed it, Dave & Buster's. There are still 4 active BattleTech centers, which is 4 more than Disney Quest. BattleTech's parent company eventually rebranded the broader IP as MechWarrior, which continues its massive city-stomping robot fun to this day. And who knows what life might be left in the mouse. Like BattleTech, the attractions from Disney Quest might well make it into other Disney theme parks, or be sold at auction. Or like Disney Quest's closing rumors in 2008, maybe the VR mouse might survive another day. Hopefully you've managed to survive today. Let us know about it. You can reach us at Design of Play on Twitter, or me at Chris_Canfield on Twitter, or email me at chris@chriscanfield.net, or email Ito Davis at maskedalbatross with 1s @gmail.com. Also, if you can, leave a review for this podcast on iTunes, Android, or wherever people complain about podcasts. It's how our babies will get clothes, and you don't want to see our babies naked. They're like a wet, deformed potato. To further clothe our babies, start your shopping expeditions on designofplay.com/Amazon. Same prices, but it helps this podcast get made. This podcast is brought to you by the Curious Lighting Etsy store and Fuber, the Uber for when social situations get all effed up. Thank you to our fabulous voice actor, Sammy Genstein. And of course, we couldn't do any of this without you, our listeners. After all, this isn't Design of Play with Chris Canfield. This is Design of Play with you, our listeners. It actually is Design of Play with Chris, not that I'm being full of myself, but that's you know what? It's now Design to Play with you, our listeners. I think that's great. For more information about Disney Quest or any other topic, ask a policeman or your parents. This has been Design to Play with you, our listeners. Thank you for playing.